Hi everyone. Hi Stephanie. Lovely to
Hi,
be with you. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Emerging Proud. It's a long
thank you.
time since I've said that, and yeah, I'm just really grateful to you for kind of inspiring me to reignite these conversations because you and I have been having kind of reflective conversations for the last, I don't know, couple of years or so, and it's just been so helpful in my learning. And I think we've kind of reached similar understandings from very different places. So I just, yeah, I'm really grateful to you being here today and having this conversation. And I think the thing that really inspired me was like the thing that gave me the real impetus to say, right, now is the time we need to do this, was because I saw your video on, I've written down the title because I knew I wouldn't remember, Self Has No Power, Not Granted by Parts. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh my goodness, this speaks to the kind of the nexus that we've been talking about: trauma, spiritual emergence, the responsibility of the therapist to be doing their own work, and sort of IFS and how it can support all of this. So yeah, and what I really love about you, Stephanie, is that you come from this place of lived experience. It's not this hierarchical um, way that you work with your clients. It's a real grounded. You do your own work. You've come from a place of lived experience, and I really respect that. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce yourself more formally, if that's okay, and yeah, just share with people kind of what you offer through IFS, and maybe give a little sort of basic introduction to IFS if people watching haven't heard of it before, don't know anything about IFS, internal family systems. That would be amazing.
Mhm.
I won't
Okay, yeah,
launch in, but let's kind of start with that. Hey.
yeah. We have to slow down a little. I was just asking my parts to slow down too, because I had my parts like, let's launch.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so I'll just say a quick little bit about me. So you're right, I did start off in working in mental health in a peer worker space because of my own emotional distress and a lot of trauma in my childhood. And that was actually a really beautiful place for me to start in. I really identified as someone who was deeply broken and wasn't sure I had anything to offer. So to kind of be able to be recognized that even in my brokenness, there was something to offer, felt, generative and hopeful. And there was sort of like a sense of that was the launch pad for me to grow with it in a sort of nurturing enough environment. It's not as much as peer work roles can be, right? Sometimes not so nurturing, but um, so that's where I came from. And then I moved slowly into support work and counseling now. And now I have a private practice in Australia on the what's called the Sunshine Coast, which is a beautiful part of subtropical east coast of Australia, about, I don't know, about 10 hours north of Sydney, if people want to know where that is. Um, and yeah, I specialize in internal family systems therapy. And it's become really my passion because it's helped me just deeply heal the wounding that's been in my system. And, I've done about 8 years of therapy prior to coming to IFS, and it didn't help me feel differently from the inside. I could kind of use I didn't do CBT even, right? I did emotionally focused therapy for 4 years in my 20s. And then I took a break to homeschool my children. And then a very long break, decades. And then when I returned to therapy, I've done transactional analysis, I've done analysis, I've done some, more conventional things. I've tried lots of different things. CBT wasn't for me, but needless of the fact that I didn't actually pursue typical kind of psychological approaches through the CBT Act and things, I still couldn't find anything that would help me. And then IFS came along, and how it's changed for me inside of myself is some sense of I fully understand myself now. Whereas I used to kind of wonder, why am I like this? And it's IFS has a way of listening inside to the parts of ourselves that hold contradicting experiences and views and beliefs, even. So, we might have parts who hold the world is not safe, and parts who say, oh no, like we should really trust people,
Mm.
you know. Or I mean, I could give so many different examples, but just as that's a kind of beginning example of starting to listen in. And when we have space for all of that, all of the contradictory voices, there's some sort of settling inside of ourselves. Well, for me, it has been, and my clients tell me too, of my contradictions make sense now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not crazy, and I'm not trying to argue or fight against this part because these parts want something. It's like, okay, this is me, and it's based on my experiences that I have such polarizations inside around what I need, want, believe, and feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so in IFS, essentially, I'll tell you a quick overview of the model. I should wrap up. So that was kind of introducing me. And I will say now I do some training in IFS. I'm not an IFS trainer for the Institute, but I run workshops on working with non-ordinary states, voice, hearing, visions, other experiences people have, spiritual emergency, through an IFS lens. I also work with people who are experiencing like, what would you call it? Just have experienced early developmental trauma and attachment disruption. So I work either with those groups or with therapists working with those groups of folks, and do some trainings around that. And then I do some other trainings just teaching people how to use IFS if they're new to it as therapists or practitioners. So that's kind of me. And then the IFS model is one where essentially Dick Schwartz followed the lead of his clients back in the day. He's not psychodynamically trained. He's not trauma trained in the conventional methods of, like, the International Society of, what do they call themselves? ISSTD. Anyway, the folks who are the trauma and dissociation folks who are all in the 3-phase model. He wasn't trained in that kind of arm, and he wasn't trained in the psychodynamic arm. He was trained as a family therapist. And as he was working with people, especially young teenage girls with bulimia, he started to realize there's this whole internal world that he hadn't been taught about in his training, and that these parts inside of us actually interact in similar ways to the way we all interact externally. And that the reason that they do that is partly because of adversity, and partly because they've taken on burdens from the earlier experiences they've had. And those burdens are beliefs about themselves, beliefs about the world, beliefs about other people, feelings or trapped sensations in the body. So there's sort of like little clusters of parts inside of us who are like full personalities. And of course, the pointy end of that is, what we call dissociative identity disorder, but we all have it. When we daydream, we're mildly dissociated, right?
Yeah.
And when we feel conflicted about if we want to go to the party or stay home, we're listening to two parts of ourselves. And if we really listened, we might hear we're just tired, but we also want to socialize. Or we might hear, I'm afraid to go to the party because I've been hurt by people in social situations because I'm not very confident. And so that would be the part who doesn't want to go. And then the part who does want to go, we might hear if we stayed with it, I'm deeply lonely, and I'm hoping there's some hope of this will be the day that I'm going to meet someone who's my person, who I feel less alone around. So this kind of like listening to all of the parts and the secret history is what Dick Schwartz calls it. He's the founder of the model, is what we do in IFS. And the other really important thing about IFS is that Dick came to listen to his clients who said sometimes they were listening inside, and what they were listening to was full of compassion and care and curiosity and love towards these suffering parts of themselves. And he'd say, well, who's that? And they'd say, well, it doesn't really feel like a part anymore. It feels like me. And so he came to call that part of our essence the self. And what we do in IFS is we help build a relationship between the self of the client who has never been damaged. And I'm going to bring in this book. There's a couple of awesome books. We were talking about them earlier. I'm sorry it's back the front for people, but the author is Donald Kalshed. And this one's called Trauma and the Soul. And the subtitle is, I'm going to have to read it on here.
I'll post the links, Stephanie. Yeah.
Great. A psycho-spiritual approach to human development and its interruption. But I'm mentioning these books because he has another one as well called The Inner World of Trauma, which is about archetypal defenses and personal spirit. And the reason I was just bringing those in is because all people, when you've had enough trauma, do actually have some knowledge of this other self.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people who've been deeply traumatized often have actually dissociated to a realm where they're in connection with the greater self. So in IFS, we have the self, which is kind of like our deeper self, which is our, might be called our soul or our essence or the undamaged part. We have parts. And then we also, through our own self energy, can connect with whatever is larger.
Mm.
And that process is deeply healing. That kind of getting to know our parts, connecting with our self energy is the healing process essentially.
Beautiful. I think the thing that I love about it is it's like you say, like Dick has created this model not from like a logical place or kind of theoretical learning place. It's all come from learning from his people that he's been supporting, and this real embodied space. So that's the thing that kind of, yeah, really appeals to me as well. And it's interesting because, you know, this stuff, it's not new. You know, depth psychologists have been talking about this for decades. But what I
Yeah.
love about the model is it's so accessible and it's so compassionate. And it feels like it's kind of intersection of trauma, all of these kind of different interdisciplinary fields of thinking and knowing. And it's just bringing it all into this one therapeutic model. Is it called a model? I don't know whether it's called a model, but yeah. Would you mind just saying before we go on, because there's so much we could kind of pick up from what you've just said, but maybe just explaining a little bit about kind of what parts are, because we might touch on kind of exiles or protector parts, or just a little overview of kind of what the parts have been called.
Sure. Yeah. So we do have parts who hold the wounding of the experience that we had. And so they're called exiles, and literally their pain has been exiled in the system. We don't generally, at the time of the wounding, we're trying to not let ourselves feel terrified, ashamed, worthless, because if that was to leak out when we're little and we had a person who's abusive or a parent who was overstretched and couldn't deal with a little person who cries or a little person who's angry or temper tantruming, we might get in trouble or get hurt more or get more rejected, or the parent might turn away from us, all of which is extremely painful for a little child.
Mm-hmm.
It can be terrifying. And so the exiled feelings and knowings, because it's not only I felt ashamed, but I come to make meaning of the shame I feel through a small person's brain,
Yeah.
which is there must be something wrong with me that mummy yelled at me or daddy spanked me or whatever the thing is, right? They make meaning. So both the belief and the felt sense in the body, as well as the feeling state of the emotions, is exiled. That's what we call those parts. They hold the wounding. And then we have two more camps of protectors who kind of run ahead. And there's a preemptive one that we call a manager. Oh, there's not one, like, I mean, this is the category of many managers. And the manager is one who says, right, from now on, we will never feel shame or worthlessness of that part, because we're going to be a good little girl or a perfect little boy or really smart or really quiet and really invisible, or, the biggest helper ever to mummy. Whatever the thing is that is going to help me survive without ever feeling those things, the manager tries to do. And then invariably, the parent, the teacher yells or something happens, despite the fact that you're good and quiet and smart and perfect and helpful. And so then a second line of defenders come in to help. And the second line of defenders we call firefighters. And the reason that Dick chose that name is they're kind of like the firefighters in real life, in that they have one job, and that is to put out the flames.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think about the flames of emotion of the exile, at the time that you're triggered, and we've all had this experience, right? Where I'm so overwhelmed with either anger or fear, like that freeze moment, or feeling like I have to caretake because like this relationship's about to end, or whatever happens in that moment where we're flooded with a feeling state. And the preemptive didn't work. So then this firefighter comes in and they're like, we're just going to put out the flames of emotion in whatever way. And as an adult, we do that through things like, drinking using various drugs, perfectionism, or people self-harm, or people, I mean, there's so many things, watching TV, scrolling.
Normalizing as well, right? Like workaholism, just like
uh,
these are like I think we're just seeing so much more shame-inducing things in society now, and it's like we're causing more dissociative splits in people, right? So how you've just explained it is just it's so accessible. It makes so much sense that like to normalize the fact that we all have these warring parts in us. Um, yeah, gosh, wow, thank you. Sorry, I've interrupted you there.
I just want to say one final thing about firefighters. In real life, firefighters, it doesn't matter if they ruin all your furniture because they saved the house. But in the internal world, firefighters tend to be pretty much beat up on by everyone externally and internally, because it's like, why did you drink again? Or why did you binge eat again? Or, why you would work for so many hours. And when we realize that they're kind of the unsung heroes in the system, because they're the ones who helped us survive back then,
Mm,
and they're trying to help. And when we actually spend time getting to know them, then we actually find out they don't even like their job, but they feel they have to do it, right?
mhm,
Because they're afraid that those exiles hold is too difficult, too painful, too overwhelming, will crush me, I won't cope. So they're trying their best. And eventually, when we get to know them, the managers, and get some agreement that we could go towards the exiles once it's safe, and everything in IFS is consent based. So we don't go anywhere until there's consent from all the protectors. We'll just dip our toe into getting to know what happened back there that made this one who really believes you're worthless or you're stupid.
mm,
And then
mm,
we come back and check again with the protectors. So that's when the healing starts to happen. The beautiful first piece of work is the kind of getting to know the system, and then we dip in. But I really wanted to just, I suppose, hold that in IFS, we know that parts are not their burdens or their roles. They're things they had to do in order to survive, and we can help them to relax once they trust that we trust them, and, that we can help them.
yeah, it's such a beautifully compassionate approach. I think that's a really good segue, what you've just said, to go back to the video that kind of I was talking about in terms of, so maybe you could give your reasonings behind that video, which was around self not having any power if not granted by the parts. So you've just
Yeah.
said you have to get consent from the parts to go there. And actually, my interpretation of that video was kind of with a lens of like looking at the experience of spiritual emergence and how we can bypass dealing with the trauma and the emotion. And I think we're kind of saying similar things from a different kind of perspective or a different angle. That's kind of would be a really good thing to focus on today is, this kind of intersection between spiritual emergency, trauma, shame, dissociation, and yeah, how we work with that. Like, how can IFS, help support people in those processes? I know we've had so many conversations around this, and there's so much that we could talk
Yeah.
about. But yeah, maybe are you
Mhm.
happy to start there and we can kind of use that as a springboard?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you speaking to is a couple of things, right? One is that when we do have a spiritual emergence, sometimes it's very blissful.
Mhm.
We feel like we've touched God, we've accessed something bigger than ourselves, which of course anyone who's actually had that experience feels the sense of like peacefulness, expansiveness, love, settling. What maybe in the past has been really frightening to be in the world now feels like possible. There's possibility, there's hope, there's connection, all of the things that we maybe didn't have before, especially if we're coming from trauma, which I think most of us are. And I think probably spiritual emergence is part of the trauma bursting through, right?
Yeah.
And that's the grace, I think, for me, the grace of spiritual emergence is that you actually almost like the way that I view it is that the trauma is kind of bursting through, and you're also have a resource to access.
Mhm.
And many people don't actually they can get lost in the amazingness of the emergence into something spiritual and forget to turn towards the trauma as well. And I remember, I'm going to get to what I said in the video in a minute, but I just want to say, I remember you saying to me, when you go through a spiritual emergence, it can like take 10 years to really integrate that. And I was like, yes, this is where you and I are on the same page,
Mm.
Katie, because for me, whether someone hears voices, whether they go through a spiritual emergence, whether they start to have some sort of like seeing visions, like how, you know, whether they end up with a diagnostic label from psychiatry, whether they end up supported through something that they become a shaman, like however it kind of sequences for someone. The if the first thing you're experiencing is a wonderful opening and you're like, wow, like I have to tell everyone this is incredible, to know that that's also kind of like we have to have some courage to turn towards the other side of that amazingness,
Yeah.
which is right there and it's drawing our attention, but sometimes we don't want to see it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the 10-year integration you're talking about.
Yeah, and actually the narratives that exist, you know, within our cultural framings at the moment, they're either trauma, they're either like a pathological perspective or they're a transpersonal perspective, which doesn't I mean, if you really dig into it, obviously they're the depth psychologists, like the Jungian perspectives and things like that, do acknowledge all of the trauma, but I think it can get lost sometimes, you know. And I think this is obviously this is my passion and my work, as you know, is trying to create a bridge between these two kind of narratives. And I think IFS does that so beautifully, because you don't label any of it. You don't label the trauma as psychopathological. You don't label the spiritual emergence as this wonderful, blissful thing. Nothing's labeled. It's just an experiential process. And I just like, this is the thing that I'm like, yes, this is what we need to change. And I think this is where you and I have kind of gone, oh my gosh, there's yeah, this huge connection with what we're saying. Um, I don't know
And
if
I
you,
think
sorry, yeah,
I'm going to go back to the video if that's okay, what I wanted to say
yeah,
about that.
okay, sure.
Um, so for me, the reason that I say, so that's a quote from Dick Schwartz. He says, you know, self has no power not granted by parts. And
Mm,
I actually don't know where the quote's from, but I've heard it around. And I recently heard another video of his, and I'll send you the link to show people that he talks in there about the way we get to self energy is through our parts. We
mm,
can't bypass our parts. We can't bypass our experience and our trauma, right? And if we think we can, then we're just spiritual bypassing, and
yeah,
we're manager led. We're led by a manager who's avoiding what's inside the shadow. What is another word for that, right?
yeah, yeah.
And it's just a beautiful interview where he really spends a whole hour trying to explaining that to folks. But for me, if we think about that actual quote, the reason I did the little video, which is I think 6 minutes or something,
Mhm,
is because what I wanted to talk to was, I have a lot of therapists who come to me for supervision or come to my trainings, and they say, oh, you know, I want my clients to start off with, you know, a meditation at the beginning and get into self energy. Now, there's two problems with that.
mm,
One is, just because they may be connecting with some self energy at the beginning, if that's even possible, doesn't mean that when they start to connect with parts, there's going to be any self energy available,
mm,
because parts can really blend in, and what we call in IFS blend in. So they take over everything, and you don't have any compassion or clarity
mm,
or connection. You're just frightened or confused or angry or completely up in the heavenly realms, you know, because some part has fully blended. So that's one of the problems. The second problem is, I do not want to ever give my clients the message that that self is more important or better than parts.
mm,
And the third thing is that a lot of people can't come to their own sense of compassion and care until they've really felt their parts. Because essentially in IFS, what happens is you listen into what's going on inside from the parts over here, whether it's exiles or protectors. It doesn't really matter. There's a part inside who needs you to get something. And as I get that, and it's so like, oh, it's a most incredible experience of kind of like, in some ways it's brand new, In
Yeah.
some ways, there's kind of in the back of your mind, you knew,
Yeah.
but you didn't know.
Mm.
And Christopher Bolus calls that the thought unknown.
Mm.
And there's these things that we have inside of us that our exiles and projectors are holding, and they become available to our conscious mind through connecting with our parts. And when that happens, our self naturally goes, oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much for letting me know that. I feel so tender, the fact that you have been holding that for the whole system for all this time and
Mm.
are only just now letting that come through. And that's naturally self energy then. I don't have to do anything as a therapist. I'm
Mm.
not trying to muscle the person to have it in the way that DBT does and other modalities try and help someone to kind of build their skills. It's just innate in us.
But can I just pick on something you just said there, which I think is so important and something that really speaks to me in this video is the importance of like the holding, the space holding for these processes. And to be an IFS therapist, you have to be constantly doing your own work, right? And that is another thing that I deeply respect about the model. And I think this is kind of what how you've explained it to me as well, in terms of, you kind of have to model being in self for your client, right? And so you have to be super, super astute and aware of when your parts are coming in and sort of, that's something I've been trying to really practice since we've been talking is like, oh, actually, okay, am I blended right now? And a conversation I'm having, I work with for IMROC, which is a lived experience organization in the UK that sort of trains peers internationally, and we're having conversations about around this, like the importance of being so aware of our embodied processes when we're holding space for people. And I think this is quite a leading edge thing. I think there are a lot of conversations happening about this in different arenas, but it's something that kind of is automatically innate in the IFS model, right? And I think is that right, something you were kind of speaking to in that video as well?
Yes, well, I think the important thing is that I want to catch a little bit of language that we wouldn't use or that I want to use differently. Now, that's okay. IFS, we would say it differently. I'm not modeling self to my client. I'm being in self to my client's parts,
Right.
and they feel it, right? And the only way I can do that is by being so intimately
Mm.
connected to my parts and having done my own healing that they trust me to give space. And when they do chime in,
Yeah.
Dick Schwartz says he asks them to step back. My parts don't love to being told to step back, but what I do say is thank you for letting me know that. If it becomes an important thing that I feel like I could bring in here, I might do that,
Mm.
but I might not also. But my parts actually have a lot of wisdom. So sometimes I'll be saying something and I'll be like, thank you. I'll take that under advisement, is my normal statement. They love that. They love that they can be a little advisor and then head off again. And
I'm
then
gonna
if,
I'm gonna take that on board.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then it takes a half a second. I hear it, and this is because I'm so connected to my parts. I have a daily practice,
Mhm.
and I know them really well. I know when they all of our parts hold things, right? When we have clients, certain clients of ours are going to bring up something in us. That's what we call countertransference in the psychodynamic approach. And if I know my parts well and they bring something up, I know where that's coming from in them. And it's nothing to do with my client, it's about my stuff.
Mhm.
IFS, what we say is if that comes into the room with the client and I don't catch it, I'm going to enact something that's unhelpful. So for me, I want to say to the part, I get that and I know what that's about for you. I'm going to come back. So I would go after the session and take that to my supervisor or my therapist, and I do some of my own work on it
Yeah.
so that I can really be in self with my client.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is kind of what has been really landing with me from our kind of reflective conversations over the last however long it's been. It's kind of you feel like one of those connections that's kind of timeless. I can't even remember how we connected.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's like this hugely self responsibility that you have to take, right? And it's like, I think the thing for me and the thing that's caused me a lot of moral injury working in like the mainstream mental health system is you see so much projection happening, like between professionals and projecting their own fear or their own whatever it is onto the clients. Whereas in IFS, it's like, okay, this is happening, this is coming up for me. I'm going to take it back and look at what it's.
You just reminded me. Yes, you just reminded me. I was working with a psychiatrist. Well, he's actually a friend, and we were having some discussions. And I was talking about the way that I work with people who end up with a diagnosis in the mental health system and then end up in my therapy room. And he said to me, when I have someone who's voice hearing and they're starting to say things that don't make sense to me, I get really like a little what was the word for it? He kind of like dysregulated. I can't remember the word he used, distressed or something. And he said, and I dissociate. And when I dissociate, I start to problem solve. And I thought,
God,
what a gift. What a
oh,
gift that he knows that and he can put into words.
yeah. What a diamond. Like, if only all doctors were like that, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is the thing. It's like there's such an awareness that this is an energetic reciprocal process. Like, there's something happening between people. Like, we're interconnected. It's not just I'm the expert. I've got the answers for you. We can only hold space for someone else to find the answers that are right for them inside themselves. And I think there's so many things that I've been kind of looking at and learning and researching in the transpersonal arena, that I'm like, oh, IFS kind of gets this anyway, you know. Yeah, that's so. I don't know, Stephanie, whether I don't know whether you've got in mind where you'd like to go next, but I'm just wondering if you could maybe give some examples around how you work, like how you work with people in this way who are
Yeah.
experienced dissociation or spiritual emergence, or whether they've called it a spiritual emergence or not. That would be really
Yeah.
helpful, I think.
Yeah, I have a few, you and I were talking beforehand, so I have a few things that I'd like to say. First of all, for people who do identify that they're going through a spiritual emergence, I always want to use that language. And for people who don't, I'm using whatever language they bring. But if I think about the spiritual emergence piece, it feels really important for me to be really listening to what is the story there. How did this come to be that they're in this place? What is the shadow as well as the light in their experience, right? Because are they using the light to run away from the shadow? Is the light here as a resource for the things that are arising that are really painful? Like, I'm really listening in a certain way to what's being said
Mm.
and kind of following their lead around how do we step towards what's spoken and then move away from what was too difficult? Because essentially, whether you hear voices, whether you're going through a spiritual emergence, whether you're dissociating in another way, I'm not sure that it's much different. And what I want to say about that is that something is coming to the surface that in IFS we would say a part's wanting something to be known
Mm.
and another part wants it to be not known because it's afraid.
All right.
And there's some good research. Oh, I just moved off of my screen. Sorry, I wanted to show you. I won't show it for long, but this book has an amazing article on attachment, specifically disorganized attachment,
Mm.
and people who have these kinds of experiences. Like, well, the chapters actually said, schizophrenia and attachment styles or something is the unfortunate name of it. But my point is that something happens where there's like something needed to be known and something needs to not be known because of some early developmental experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether the person's having a spiritual emergence and very connected with something spiritual, or whether they're just saying, no, I'm just having this other experience where I'm terrified all the time. I'm following their lead and I'm listening to kind of like what's said, themes. There's often themes of like good and evil, powerlessness, which is really, if we want to read Lucy Johnson's power threat meaning framework, because she has a really lovely conceptualization of how people have these experiences from adversities based on powerlessness in the past, people using power over them. I like the stuff that Moskowitz and others are writing about because I mean, I use Lucy's stuff, Lucy's power threat meaning things, because I think that what we want to be doing is helping people mentalize. So when I think of IFS, what I'm seeing is it's a way of a way of listening to the client to help them find words for their meaning that so far they haven't been able to put the dots together around.
Right, right.
And
Yeah.
so for me, I'll give you a couple of examples. So one of them was a gentleman that I was working with. And early on in our work, the first few sessions, at one point, I was asking some questions, and he said to me, "Oh, I'm enjoying your relentless curiosity." And I thought, that's an interesting turn of phrase. It doesn't sound like you're enjoying it, is what I thought to myself. But I had also learned very quickly in the first couple of sessions with him that he had a lot of socialization as a young child, that he had to be very socially correct and polite. And so I was thinking to myself, there's something about the politeness of needing to thank me for something actually it sounds like he doesn't enjoy. And I thought if I brought it up to him that he wasn't really enjoying it, it might be too confrontational, because it would seem like he would hear me saying, you weren't very polite to me. So I didn't do that there, but I flagged it in my mind and I just held it. And then a few sessions later, we were listening inside, and he has a voice. And so the voice, said something, I can't remember the content of the actual session, but we were getting to know this voice. And then I said, ask the voice, what's it afraid would happen if it didn't say that thing? And it was, I don't know, something about horses or rabbits, or, like something way over here. And then he said, if he doesn't say anything about, I said, what does it mean if it doesn't say anything about those horses or whatever? And he says, Sherlock Holmes. He said, the voice says Sherlock Holmes. And I was like, what does that mean? That's confusing. And I thought for a second, oh, hang on a second. No, this is what Matt Ball calls the dissociotic moment. So one of my teachers has been Matthew Ball from the Humane Clinic in Adelaide, Australia. And he talks about the moment when something in the relationship stops feeling safe and the person dissociates into what looks like a psychotic symptom, right? Because a psychiatrist would see that moment and say, that's nonsense, saying that kind of word, right? So I went, okay, something in the relationship just didn't feel good. And so basically I said to him, I kind of did a little quick mental arithmetic in my brain around what that could possibly mean. And I remembered this earlier time about my questions being a bit probably not enjoyable. And I said, who's Sherlock Holmes, you or me? And he said, you are. And I went, okay, so I'm on the right track. He's telling me about me. And I said, are my questions too intrusive? And he said, yes. And I said, great. Thank you so much for letting me know. Let's pivot somewhere else. So for me, that's what I'm wanting to do all the time is the reason I asked about the voice. I want to say this before I pause, but I want to say this. The reason I asked the voice that, which is really important, is he had just told me something significant. So a part of him communicated something. I asked a question, and at the point of the question, he had to retreat because it became too much.
Right. I mean, yeah, it always makes me feel so emotional when I hear you talking about the stories and how you work with people, because, well, partly as well, from saying before, you have to be so astute, you have to be so in your center to know what's going on and to catch things like that, right? But the contrast with the example that you've just been given, it's like how somebody would be perceived, and then the treatment trajectory if that had been said to a psychiatrist, as opposed to the holding and the sense making that you're supporting someone to do. It's just like it's just worlds apart. And I think I'm really glad that you've brought up Matt Ball's work, and I think we're both also connected with Charlie Heriot Maitland, that's just done a new study on shame. And I mean, all of this stuff that you're talking about was coming up in my research. So I'm doing a research study on people who looking at it's a heuristic inquiry on people who have been diagnosed with psychosis but actually perceive it to have been a transformative experience, some spiritual emergence, whatever you want to call it. And I was starting to kind of look at the meaning, but what's come out of that is people, the themes, actually there's so many themes around what the catalysts were. and like the internal split. Shame is a huge part of that, a core wound. And there's a real trajectory arc of like the catalysts, what the experiences look like, what happened within those experiences. So the symbology, like you said, people can't get to, they can't mentalize what's going on for themselves. So it comes up as symbol or metaphor. And then kind of the way that people kind of were able to frame it outside of the system is what helped them transform. And I think there's so many themes from what you've just said that's come up in my research, also in terms of one of my research participants said, you know, I've come to realize whatever experience is called as psychosis, they don't happen for no reason. A lot of it is to do with early attachment wounding. And I was like, yes, like yes. And all of this stuff, like it's been a really emotive process for me, because it's all like brought up all of my own, you know, process again. And have had to kind of revisit, you know, I've spoken to you about this, sitting with my own parts and the parts that I've kind of re-exiled because of it, trying to integrate back into social norms. And we can talk a little bit about that as well, because I love, you know, IFS's approach with the cultural burdens and that kind of thing. But there's just so much rich material in what you've just said. Yeah, I might be going off on a tangent now, so I'll let you, I'll let you
Great.
speak.
That was great. You've just said so many wonderful things, and I wrote a couple of notes, but I wanted to just speak a little bit. So we're going to come back to legacy burdens and other things in a minute. I'm so glad that you're getting that experience through the research, right? You're getting these words, you're getting other form, you know, other people giving language to these experiences. And when you said that all of these experiences are transformative, that's what my experience has been. If we don't medicate people, then their experience can be transformative, and that it's all arising for a reason. I've never met a client who hasn't had something that's triggering it. And I have another little story, if it's okay, that you just reminded me of.
Yeah.
I had I'm going to change a few of the little facts just for privacy, but I had a young man, he was in college, away at college, and he contacted me through a relative, and I was seeing him for a period of time, and he told me about, and I think I also want to just tie back here around what I said about the guy who was saying Sherlock Holmes, is that for me, I always know what was spoken about that was important about the horse will come back at another time. So it's not lost, even though he's like, we're talking about this thing. I ask a pointed question. He says, I can't go there. Another part will bring that back at a later time. So I don't have to chase it ever. Okay. That's why it's transformative, because you're literally going, this arose for a moment. It's known now in the system, has to be disowned again because it got a little too heated. And then eventually it'll come up again and come up again. And eventually those little moments start to build safety making, because essentially what I'm doing is I'm saying to the person, I am not going to intrude on your inner world ever.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
So their pace is the thing that's going to help us find safety around how we go towards what needs to be here, because it is transformation, and transformation is painful. You know, it's really hard.
Right? You can't force it.
No.
The mainstream, in the mainstream system, we have X amount of, you have 12 hours to get to them, you know, to heal. And it's like, oh my God, it's all so, yeah. Anyway, let's not go there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I was going to tell you about this person who, you know, he was at college and he started to hear voices and see visions, right? What got called hallucinations. And he was really distressed by it. And his family member knew about IFS and contacted me and said, would you see this person? His nephew. So his uncle called me. And anyway, so I was seeing him, and I asked him at one point, he's saying, I can't make any sense of any of this. I haven't had trauma. And he was telling me all that. And at one point he told me the story of a recent incident where he had seen a tiger coming down the corridor in his dorm room. And he got really frightened. He started running. And I said to him, okay, what happened just before then? Because I'm like, something had happened that made him feel unsafe, surely. And he said, nothing. I was just talking to my friends. And I said, okay, well, how did you feel as you were speaking to your friends? He said, well, I was making jokes and they were all laughing and we were having great fun. And I was really relaxed. And I said, okay, and what was difficult? Was there anything difficult in that moment? And he said, yeah, I felt really worried about being relaxed. And I went,
Mm.
how interesting. And I said to him, has there ever been a time in your life where you felt relaxed and then something didn't work out and it frightened you? And he said, yeah, when I was such and such age, I was in the driveway and this person backed into me with their car and I was hit by a car while I was playing. And I went, wow,
Mm.
like such an easy,
Mm.
such an easy, I didn't lead him anywhere. I just was literally like, well, you said you were happy. And then you said the only bad thing about being happy was you kind of felt like too worried about being happy. And then I said, so I didn't lead him there. He told me the story. And I'm like, well, this is kind of making sense to me why your voices are now coming in telling you don't relax, right?
Mm.
And I didn't end up working with him for very much longer because of some other things about a school program that he was a part of, and the school program needing him to go away. And so I didn't. His mum's kept in contact and said he's actually doing pretty well. It was a first episode experience, so it was really wonderful that I said to him, "Are you interested in knowing why the voices have come?" And he was very open. I think that made it easier for him, I think, to recover.
Do you know, I'm wondering whether there's something around like you normalizing that experience for him as well that's helped that not kind of that it has helped it subside, because I think when these experiences, these initial, like, the early intervention psychosis teams, I know, try not to label too soon as well. I think they're probably more progressive in the system than a lot of services. They are in the UK as well anyway. I don't know how it is over there, but um yeah, I think when these experiences, if that's the difference, isn't it, as well? That's kind of what I've been looking at as well, in terms of like whether these experiences can be facilitated or whether they get suppressed and, labeled, medicated, and then constantly there's some internal conflict that's kind of trying to break through, and so you get this cyclical process of like more hallucinations or more psychotic breaks of dissociation or whatever. And actually, if you can hold that and help someone make sense of it and normalize it, so that's kind
Mm,
of Charlie Heriot Maitland's initial paper on the impact of normalizing, like the power of normalizing out of the ordinary experiences paper, like in 10 years ago, was really inspired me around this. I can't remember, I've lost my track now, I don't know where I'm going. My menopause brain's kicked in
you
now.
were saying maybe he got through it because of some normalizing.
Yeah, and just that beautiful kind of, it made me think as well about Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger, like book. I love
Yes.
Peter Levine's work. Yeah, just reminded me, and how actually people have these shared archetypes or shared symbols or metaphors that come up for them. Like he talked about a tiger with a woman that he was working with as well, and it just reminded me when you were speaking then. Oh, we've had a little internet blip there, sorry. Um, yeah, so yeah, there's just so much nuggets of gold in this, Stephanie.
Yeah.
I really hope
Yeah.
it's helping people as well, who might have experienced these things, or maybe going through things, to kind of go, okay, there's another way of looking at it. If someone's being labeled or misunderstood, or you get told that you've got no lucidity if you're in the system. Oh, that person's completely not lucid. It's like, but they're trying to relay
Yeah.
something in a different way.
It's, yeah. When I'm teaching on this, I have some beautiful, not only stories of working with clients, but clients have allowed me to like share some of their. One of my clients said, I made you a song. And he has this song where he took a section of the way that he makes music is apparently there's a form of music, I'm too old to know about it apparently, where you put lyrics from all kinds of things to music. So like you might take Martin Luther's King's, I Have a Dream speech and put it to
Oh,
music
yeah,
and
yeah.
overlay it with various other things. And so he does that form of music, and he'd taken a snippet of our session, one of these really important sessions where he actually called the song Maybe I'm Not Bad.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and it was just a session where it just felt like finally after 2 years of work, something like just cracked open.
Mm-hmm.
He was telling me about, a lot of things around, quantum physics and an alternate universe influencing him, and there's and nothing he could do was right. And I'm like listening for the understory around his own adversities where he couldn't do anything right.
Mm-hmm.
And the metaphor of this alternate universe impacting him and his choices. So it's kind of like here's what gets called delusional, right? Here is the reality of his actual narrative. And in the session, what we had done is we'd spent 2 years him telling about his quantum world and quantum physics, and he's so much more smart than I am. Like, I think there's something about giftedness and sensitivity with these folks that, like, the creativity is outrageous, right? Their minds are so big. And so he could understand all this stuff about quantum physics I had no idea about. And we spent 2 years with me kind of getting that. And we got to this session where I said, okay, slow down and let me get this. And we just slowly went through it. And I said, okay, so, and then when we got to the point of like, okay, I think I got it. And he loves recording sessions when there's like a breakthrough moment. So I said, do you want to record it? He said, yes. So we recorded it. And I said, this is what I just heard you say. And then he said some things, and then I reflected that back again. Anyway, and I said, okay, so it's like either this quantum world has influenced you and you have no choice, or you're a bad person. That's basically what it came down to, is like either I did choose to do these things and that makes me bad. And this is like shame that he's carried since he was a baby, basically,
Mm-hmm.
or he's influenced by this alternate reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, ultimately, quantum physics is true. So who knows? But my point is, which is what I'm always holding, right? How do I know? But my point is that there's some pain in there around his belief that he's not bad. And I said to him, what if it's not that simple? And I gave him my frame of reference around some of the choices you made were from a really constrained place. Where do you regret your decisions? Yes. But was it kind of like coming from some wounding where you felt backed into a corner? That's what I hear happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, wow, that is the most compassionate thing I have ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
And then he put it to music. And when I'm doing my trainings, he lets me share that. I won't share it on a public forum like this for anyone to watch, but in small groups, he's allowed me to use it. And I think that the thing for me is that these transformative moments, about a year earlier, we had had almost exactly the same situation where I had said to him, can I tell you what I think? And I had told him, and he'd said, that no, that is not, because he was so full of shame he couldn't take on that he wasn't bad.
Yeah.
It was so affronting to him. And he told me very straightforwardly that I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I mean by the moment, right?
Mm-hmm. So yes,
We
the timing that has its own, it has its own evolution, it has its own timing. So
yeah.
would that be a firefighter that came in to say, no, there's no way that I'm not a bad person? Would that be would that be a firefighter, or would that be an exiled part?
Um,
Like, or is it not
it
that?
could have been a firefighter, it could have been a manager. It didn't have the energy of an exile. Normally they're like little children. This was a kind of like
Mhm.
scared teenager who was putting me in my place. Thank you.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So probably a firefighter.
Something I just wanted to actually, you've just reminded me, go back to, if you don't mind, is, when you were talking about kind of people who are having, the blissful spiritual experience, spiritual emergence experience, which, it can take us kind of um, away from dealing with the trauma. But then, would you say what you've experienced, because this is something I'm trying to like get to grips with at the moment, is people then can become blended with the young part that is perceiving that experience through this very young lens. So,
Mhm.
um,
I Yeah, I don't know. I haven't worked enough with people going through spiritual emergence in the acute. I tend to find people when they're kind of mostly out the other side of it and helping them to navigate through that end of it. Um, and but yeah, I haven't noticed that particular thing, but you might have
mm,
because you've got a lot more
yeah,
exposure.
yeah, it's just actually making me think of someone in particular, who, you know, neither the blissful, who was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder, because the swinging, you know, of between the bliss to then the, like, the shame, and then that you go into the trauma and the darkness.
Mm.
But years of the cycle, but neither the heightened states were supported in a compassionate way, nor the kind of the trauma. But yeah, looking, I guess, reflecting on it, it was like the heightened states were very much kind of, there was truth, there was quantum stuff coming through, but there was also this very kind of young lens of perception. And I'm wondering how, whether you have any ideas, and this is just off the cuff, so you might not, and so sorry if I'm sort of springing this on you, but it's something that I'm just, yeah, thinking about now in terms of like new services. And maybe we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of like training peers in IFS to kind of work more in
Yeah.
this way, which would just be incredible. Um, but yeah, how could we hold someone who's in that extreme state in a more compassionate way, who might be interpreting, you know, they're not grounded, but they're interpreting what is happening to them through this very young part, whether
Mm.
there's a way of like holding, or whether you think actually just normalizing the narrative. Because a lot of my research participants, I've said to them, what did you ideally need at the time? And they've said someone with lived experience who knew the process, who kind of got that it was a process, didn't want to label me as crazy, could sort of hold space and help me find meaning in it. And I'm wondering whether it is that piece around normalization and sort of giving this a more grounded narrative that's the key. I don't know. There's so much going on
Yeah.
in those
I
states.
think there's two things, right? So in IFS, what I always say to people is that my biggest tool is past detecting. So when I'm with someone going through an experience, a lot of what I'm doing is sort of reflecting back what I'm hearing in parts language. And
Mm,
what I'm wanting to do is
yeah.
I'm wanting to offer my empathy. So I use some ECPR. I'm using my embodied sense of something. I'm
Mm,
feeling it in my body and using the ECPR pieces around I'm with you and that makes sense, or that sounds really painful and difficult. What was that like? What is that like for you? And sort of when I've been in those places, the things that have helped me is walking in nature, so sort of like I'm a peer, I'm here, and this is what we're going to help you to kind of feel grounded. But also what you're telling me sounds, there's the parts of you who are desperately trying to make sense, the parts of you who are like agitated and racing around. Is my internet playing up?
a little bit, but we're kind of okay. I didn't miss anything, unfortunately, I don't think. I'll
I
tell.
can pop I can pop onto my Wi-Fi if you want.
It's just started. It's okay now. It's only been very slightly. I'll tell you if that happens again.
Yeah. So for me, there's something about past detecting and listening for under what's said. I think,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry, you just reminded me actually. So I think I kind of intuitively did this quite recently with a colleague who was really struggling. Um, had a really difficult holding conversation, kind of on the edge of, you know, going into an altered state. And that's kind of, I guess, what I intuitively did. It's like it sounds like there's this going on, and there's this, but there's this kind of um this argument going on within you. And like, yeah, and that was actually, yeah, okay, that's helpful. And maybe, I mean, we're going to be talking about, you know, developing, maybe you mention it now briefly, but with IMROC, hopefully you'll be running some trainings for peers around using IFS to support people. And I think, this is all part of the conversations we're having around what's the most important thing that people need to be the best support for people who are in altered states. And it's to like be very in touch with your own, to have done your own work, well, be doing your, it's never done, is it? Be doing your own work, be aware of your own sort of, embodied processes. And then, but also, being in this detector mode and this really curious place, because that's self, isn't it? Curious. Um,
Yeah.
and just kind of being curious with the person. So you're not imposing anything on them.
Yeah,
You're kind of,
exactly.
you're kind of, you're trying to work it out together. And that's what
Yeah.
people are saying in the research that they wanted. So maybe we can, develop the training a little around that as well. I'm getting it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing about all the trainings that I do, there's two important things. One is they come from my own experience of my healing, because I think that from my experience of my clients, there seems to be some sense of we all tend to take a similar path.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so when I'm doing a training at the moment, which is 3-month immersion into IFS and early developmental trauma, um, specifically looking at very nuanced ways of using IFS that are outside what we get taught in the level trainings, which is much more protocolized. Because once you get good at IFS, it's not the protocol that you get taught. You have to learn that, but then you get to actually kind of like be very, very attuned. At the first year or so, 2 years, I was probably not very attuned to my clients because I was trying to learn the protocol.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But then you kind of end up with it embodied, and you're just much more in a beautiful. My friend David Stern talks about being the nimble dance partner to my client, right?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So this other training that I run is based on that, but it's because I went through my own experience of really a 2-year transference experience with my own IFS practitioner.
Right.
And that healing led me to launch into a big lot of research on transference, on early developmental trauma, on attachment wounding, specifically disorganized attachment, because I found out, even though I identify as having a more sort of I think we all have all attachment styles actually, but we end up having one that's kind of like primary. And that's partly because each way that we relate to each person is different based on their attachment style, which is what Dan Siegel's work's about.
Yeah.
But also, I'll just say that despite having kind of my primary is much more of an anxious attachment, I found a disorganized attached baby. And I knew these memories, but to really witness them and experience that visceral sense of that baby who needed her mother and whose mother wasn't safe, and the push pull and the fear of my adult fear of people, despite the fact that I'm very connected to a lot of people, it had a certain level to it. And my IFS practitioner was so self-led that barrier that I had was starting to break down, and it was terrifying. It wasn't terrifying because she was a bad person. It was terrifying because she loved me and I could barely manage it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that piece of work led me to do all this research, to not only read books, but also go and see some folks for therapy who specialize in shame. I went and saw Patricia DeYoung and someone who works in AEDP. But my point is, I don't know how I quite remembered getting onto this, but there's something about, you were talking about IMROC. For me, the lived experience is what informs all my training. And so my lived experience of my shame processing work and the transference enabled me to do that training. But then when I go to work as a peer worker, I teach peer workers, I'm going to be not only bringing my lived experience, but also hearing from them, what are they most needing? I think that's what's the most important, is how do I take what I do and apply it to a situation that's different to being a therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very reciprocal process, and I think it's really important what you said as well there, to highlight, how how much lived experience gets unrecognized and belittled, and they're the least paid people within the system, and it's so unrecognized, actually, the wisdom that's in these experiences. If we like, and this is what I love about you, Stefan, it's like, okay, you've recognized there's this thing going on, I'm going to go away and research it and like find out about myself. That's what makes me feel safe with you, and why we've had such depth of like processing together, because it's like, okay, you're being really vulnerable with me, you're like sharing your parts, and kind of that's then a real reciprocal learning process, because it's helping me recognize, oh yeah, there's this part in me coming up right now, and we don't have that in our everyday, patriarchal
No.
ways of being. I kind of normal language for me now, and I forget. Like sometimes I'll talk about I've got this part, and then it's like, I'll get told, "Oh, never mind that. You've just got to get on," and I'm like, "Oh God, that's so like
Yeah.
um counter everything that we know to be healthy and where we what we need to be doing." And it's yeah, I don't know whether maybe we can kind of touch on that a little bit, because I know we don't
Mhm.
have that much longer. Last time we were kind of chatting for like an hour and a half, and we're like, let's try and keep this a bit shorter. But um, yeah, talking a little bit around that, because it's all linked to shame, isn't it? And external pressures of like social norms, that we try and fit ourselves into. And I know IFS, really acknowledge, I'm having conversations, also really inspired through Imrock as well. Who I see as really leading edge, to be honest, in a lot of these conversations around, I'm just learning about my unconscious biases in terms of my white privilege. And, we're having conversations around decolonization of trainings and therapy, and it's a minefield. But
Mm.
actually, that's the real spiritual lens as well, because we've become so disconnected from ourselves, our environment, each other, because of these, industrialized patriarchal norms that we're trying
Mm.
to fit ourselves into. And then there's more and more people having these existential crises, because they're like, I just suffocated. I can't fit into any more boxes. I know,
Yeah.
yeah, you've got a lot of thoughts on this. So, can
Yeah, I love to quote PJ Monahan and Oryx Cohen did a video called a documentary called Healing Voices. And I think it was released back in like 2018, 19. And we actually brought them out to Australia, Matt Ball and I, when I was working with Matt. And I love, there's a quote in that film from a woman named Jen where she talks about the ever narrowing definition of normal,
mm,
that our society is kind of like more and more and more, these things are considered disorders and this is what's normal.
mm,
And what's normal is this male dominated patriarchal capitalist, kind of way of thinking where,
mhm,
feelings are not welcome, big experiences are not welcome. You're just a part of the kind of the machine, the industrial machine is the acceptable norm, and anything outside of that. So, yeah, I have. I can't remember. We had this private chat, right, where we were going to talk about stuff. I can't remember what I touched on. I remember I got thoroughly on my soapbox about something to do with
so I
all of
think we
that.
can encourage that in each other. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's just important in terms of like, actually IFS. I think I was saying, I see IFS as being very progressive in these terms as well, because you acknowledge cultural burdens, like legacy burdens, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
And
what I wanted to bring in.
and
Yeah.
what's it, unattached burdens as well. So
Yes.
this
Yes.
is really of interest for me in terms of, the spiritual emergence experiences. And, maybe we won't go there so much today, but the fact that actually you acknowledge the possibility of spirit attachment, and, what
Mm.
else could be going on. So it's not this very white Western lens. It's a very expansive transcultural approach as well. So
Yeah.
it makes way for all of these narratives.
I think it's worth just mentioning Robert Falconer, right, who's written the book The Others Within Us, because he beautifully speaks about some of those things. And because Dick Schwartz listened to his clients, he was able to go there. He didn't have to think, this is not what I learned in school. He
Mm-hmm.
went, okay, so far I've been following my clients' lead and they keep healing. They keep really getting better, better than I've ever seen clients get. So I'm going to follow them now when they're telling me it's some spirit or another in them, or that it's not their burden, it's their mother's burden that they've been carrying. And how do they want to release the legacy burdens or the cultural burdens that they've carried, the burdens that weren't even theirs, but that they learned from culture, that boys don't cry or girls don't get angry or whatever, or girls don't cry and boys don't become angry, whatever they learned, right? That they can be speaking for that. So I do love that about IFS, is that it's very client led when
Yeah.
we allow it to be. And I think we have to do our own work to really get it. And I think there's a lot of it's become so popular in the last 4 years. You know, when I did my first levels, I easily got in. But now you've got years long waits, which
Yeah.
is why I'm teaching I do a 50-hour training on the skills of IFS, because it's impossible almost to get into a level one. But what I was going to say about the new, like, popularity has meant there's a lot of people skipping through and going to do level 3 who haven't done supervision, who haven't done their own therapy,
Mm.
and, you know, they're not deepening into the model. Historically,
Oh, I've lost you a little bit there, Stephanie.
are we breaking up?
Yeah. There we go. You're back now. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really important.
Okay.
I think with anything that takes off, it can take off when it takes off super quickly, and I can see why it is because it's such a brilliant model. But yeah, then there's the risk of, like we were saying with the clients, you can't rush the process, and you can't rush it either to, to hold space with people. So, um, oh, oh, you've gone a little robot.
I'm just going to I'm going to change over for a second,
Okay,
Katie.
cool. I love that you've got your Kabi Kabi and Jinbara. I don't know if I've pronounced that totally wrong. Lands, honoring the lands on there as well. I wanted to ask you before we actually, yeah, because I was going to ask you about your trainings and things, and I'll put the link to your website below this video. But could we just go back, because I know you've told me stories around, and it speaks so much to the whole like intergenerational trauma, a narrative as well that's sort of big at the moment in the trauma informed conversations around, we're not just carrying our own trauma, we're carrying pre-birth, we're carrying trauma from
Yes.
our ancestors, that needs to be released. And you just sort of described how that works within an IFS process. Would you mind just briefly kind of explaining that?
You want me to explain the process of how we let go of the
Yeah,
legacy burden?
yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah,
Okay.
sure thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we do is we ask the person, it becomes clear that it's not all of their own trauma, their own burden. So, like, I might not have had an experience of my mum shaming me for crying, but I might have heard from my mum that she doesn't know it's safe to cry, for instance. I made that up. I don't know if that's an actual burden. But so we might have internalized, even though my mum had always cuddled me when I cried, I might have felt her energy that she was uncomfortable because
Mm,
she was never allowed to cry. And so when we go inside and we start to listen to the part who knows I'm not allowed to ever cry,
mm,
we say, oh, what percentage of this is your burden and what percentage is from what we say, is this your burden? And they say, no, it's from my mum. Okay, what percentage is yours and what percentage is your mother's? And these parts just know. They
mm,
might say 10% is mine. I could feel my mum and I could kind of feel that discomfort. And 90% is from my mum, or they might say 50-50 or whatever it is, right? And then we say to them, okay, well, let's offer the percentage that's not yours back first. It helps us to clear the percentage that is ours much more easily. And there's an actual process for clearing the piece that's ours that we want to make sure we can go through, but we can't do that till we've cleared the legacy. So we say, are you ready to give that back? Is there anyone who's not? And sometimes people have parts who are like, no, my knowing that, you know, that if this is my way of being loyal to my family by keeping this knowing that, you know, the Mitchell family doesn't, you know, that's my last name, even though that's not actually my birth name. The Mitchell family doesn't X, Y, and Z, right? So if I let go of that burden, then I might be disloyal, or I'll lose connection to my family, whatever the core belief is. So then we would have to work with that part a little bit, help it to connect with some self energy, let them know you can have connection to your family without that being the case. We have this beautiful way where we literally, we don't try and reassure us. Self is there and has clarity from something else.
Right.
And the part literally goes, oh, yeah, because they're little. The parts are still little. And the person's self is grown. And by self letting the part know, I, as a therapist, don't have to kind of influence anything, if that makes sense. That feels important for me to put that in.
Yeah. Okay.
So then once let's say, would you like to? They said, and we've addressed the protector's concern, and then everyone's on board. Yes, I would like to let that belief go. Sorry, excuse me. Basically, what we do is we say, just hand that back to whoever that was, your mother, father, uncle, grandmother, whoever, and let them know that this was never mine and I don't need it any longer. And let them know that we're not handing it back to criticize them, harm them, or wound them. We're handing them back because we don't need it and they get to heal too. So then we have a process of, it goes back to them and we say, would you now, mother, father, uncle, grandfather, like to hand that back to who you got it from? And then hand it all the way down the family line. And it's an energetic process. It's very alive and visual. We hand it back all the way to where it comes from. For people who've had, you know, been in the Holocaust, it might be all the way to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Might be to the guards who were there. It might be all the way back to, like, well, who knows, hundreds of generations. But the person has an intuitive sense. They hand it back to the origin, and then the person who originally got it gives it to the light. And everyone in the healing, everyone in the family line gets healed. And then the healing comes back down the family line to the person. And you have an embodied sense. So when I've done this, it's unbelievable, the visceral sense that you have in your body of having that healing energy coming in. And kind of like, for me, I then, you know, I can say to my clients, would you like to hand that on to anyone else? Now that it's yours, you can have it for you, but you can share it. So I might hand it on to my children and their children. So it's like, it goes back up the line and then it goes forward down the line. It's really,
isn't it? It's so beautiful. Thank you for describing that. I had an experience of that and it's so powerful. Like, I think going back to what you were saying before, you know, early on, it's like you've done years and years of therapy, and actually IFS has been the thing that's really got to the heart of transformation. And yeah, I mean, I only discovered it a couple of years ago and it's been incredibly powerful for me too. So yeah. Yeah, thank you. I can talk to you for hours, but I think we probably need to start wrapping up. I was just, I don't not jotted down a few notes earlier of things that I wanted to sort of touch on, but I think we've probably covered most of it. How about you?
I also have covered, yes, I've covered everything that was on my notepad.
Actually, one thing that I didn't mention, because you've mentioned a couple of books that, I mean, there's so many books we can talk about, but all my friend mentioned, who has also sort of lots of years of having IFS, mentioned a book called All Together Us, which I think really, I don't know if you're aware of that book, and I'll put the link to all of the books that you've mentioned and that the teachers and things that we've mentioned too, power threat meaning framework and all of that, in links below. But the Altogether Us is, I think it's kind of, it's on my like list of hundreds of books to get, but you know, speaks to kind of using IFS with marginalized groups. So in terms of like this cultural appropriation and all of that, all of these kind of colonization discussions we're having, I think there are, you know, examples in there around how to use IFS with, you know, BAME groups and different kind of marginalized groups, which is important, I think,
Mm.
well, in
Yeah.
terms of how expansive the model inclusive, expansive and inclusive the model is.
Yes. So that book actually covers so many. Apparently, it's a very large book. I haven't personally bought it, but um, it's a very large book and it has many, many authors. It's an edited edition, and some of it is, yes, marginalized groups, and various people who work with marginalized groups have written a chapter. And then there's other ones that are just more sort of like IFS and the Enneagram, and IFS and working with sexuality. So it's kind of a topic based,
Okay.
people in different. I was really disappointed that I wasn't invited to offer a chapter on working with people who have non-ordinary states, because
Yeah.
it's a I mean, I don't think Jenna, who wrote it, didn't probably know about me at the time. Who edited it, sorry, didn't probably know about me at the time, because I think it's fairly US based.
Right. Because actually my friend who told me about it said, "Why is Stephanie not in there?" Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Maybe we can do something. Who knows? Who knows where this is all going to go? But yeah,
I'm
I'm
not
so
worried.
sorry.
I was going to say, I'm not particularly worried about the book because I'm starting research on working with IFS and non-ordinary states in September with the University of California, San Francisco,
Mhm.
and Flinders University, an Australian university here. And that will publish a whole heap of papers and then hopefully a book as well. So,
Brilliant. Amazing. And, this is so helpful, and you've really inspired me to kind of restart having these conversations. And I'm speaking with Imrock as well about doing kind of a speaker series. And I know we're talking about bringing in some of your trainings into offerings as well. So excited to, collaborate more with you, hopefully in the future. Um, the other thing is really exciting possibility is that Imrock have been talking about, they have lived experience lead contact within the government in Australia, and have been talking with her about kind of doing some kind of a collaboration between the UK and Australia. So I'd love to bring you into that as well. So maybe I can introduce you guys. But just lots of possibilities.
mm,
I love collaborations and connecting and networking, and like kind of joining the dots between the fields and who's doing what, and um yeah
yeah,
exciting. We can, there's more power in doing it together, isn't there? So
yeah,
done with all of
absolutely.
these siloed fields, it's really not helpful. um yeah, thank you so
Good.
much, Stephanie. Been
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who've stayed on as all the way to the end, because I know that it's a long video, but it's just we planned to make it shorter this time, but it just didn't work out.
yeah,
We have so much to say.
it's shorter than before. But yeah.
I thought we did an hour and 30 last time.
Oh my good. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking we started at 10:15, but it wasn't, was it? So okay. Yeah, you're right. Never mind. People have watched it or they haven't. If you have, thanks for still being here. But yeah, I mean, what you have to share is it's beautiful. It's so from the heart. I think, I can feel it. It's authentic, and that's why you have inspired me so much. So very grateful. Thanks.
Good.
All
So
right.
much more to come.
Yes, so much more to come. I'll put the links to your website below so people can find out about your trainings and your workshops. All right.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. Bye.